In this morning's Health Watch, understanding HPV, the human papillomavirus, the numbers are alarming. It affects about 80% of all women by the age of 50. Our Dr. Jennifer Ashton is here with more. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning, Julie. You know, HPV may be the most common sexually transmitted infection, but it's also the least understood. So we sat down with 4 young women to talk about their thoughts and concerns.
I think it's important that people start talking about it and start being honest.
How are you? I'd like to ask the doctor, if you do get HPV, is it curable or will it always be there?
Coffee and HPV discussion?
This is something that we all need to know because in the end, 80% of us are going to get it.
What do you think some of the myths are about HPV?
That you're promiscuous if you have it.
Yeah.
Because it just takes one time, one person, and you don't even have to have sex.
Exactly. And not even necessarily actual sexual intercourse, but just skin-to-skin contact. You can get it.
Up until a year ago, I thought none of my friends had it. And then when I started talking to them, 4 or 5 of my friends said, oh, I have HPV or I had HPV.
Does it make you feel better now knowing that HPV is so common? Do you think it lessens the social stigma?
I think it does, because it made me less embarrassed.
So you have HPV. It was picked up on a routine GYN visit.
I just went and got a pap smear, and then, everything's fine, and then they just say, hi, Elizabeth, you have precancerous cells on your cervix. And I'm like, I don't know what this means. This was like 3 years ago. I had no idea.
How did you feel emotionally when you got that call?
I was shattered. I just started sobbing. I didn't know if my life was over. I didn't know if I had cancer.
The good news is most people, 90% of healthy people, clear this virus on their own. Might take up to 3 years, which is why they probably said, we're going to follow you really closely. But the majority of cases go away on their own. They don't become cancer.
Really? Well, from everything I've heard, once you have HPV, you have it the rest of your life. Is that true?
Well,
can it go
remember
away?
also that HPV, you may have heard or learned that there's over 100 different subtypes. So sometimes it can stay latent in your body, dormant, kind of asleep, and be reactivated much later in life. But most of the time, you clear that type, but then again, there are 99 plus other types that you can still be exposed to.
What are the effects on fertility with HPV?
Well, that's another great question. Obviously, in extreme cases, if it goes on to cause cervical cancer, that can have an impact on a woman's fertility. But just being infected or exposed to the HPV virus in and of itself, for the vast majority of young women, when they clear the virus on their own, doesn't really have any known impact on fertility down the road.
But what if it's been 3 years and it comes back? Does that mean?
When you're talking about something that's microscopic, that can have no symptoms, that is so common, then you see why it's so easy for people to get it. And that's why I think one of the biggest take-homes is you have to see a gynecologist every year. It's really important. Thanks so much. You guys are really great.
I have more questions. What are the symptoms of HPV if you have it?
Well, that's the thing, Julie. Most of the time, it's microscopic and asymptomatic, so it might not give you any symptoms unless there's an overt or obvious genital wart there.
So does a routine pap smear show you have this, or is there a specific test you should be asking your doctor for to test for it?
Well, yes and yes. The vast majority of pap smears done in women over the age of 30 automatically will test for the HPV virus. However, there is a separate test which you can ask for, but most of the time in younger women in their 20s, gynecologists don't even test for HPV because it's presumed or assumed that so many of those young women will have it.
My goodness. Can you prevent it?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? The only way to prevent it for sure is complete abstinence, because again, it can be passed by skin-to-skin contact, not just sexual intercourse. But other ways for prevention: delaying onset of sexual activity until older age, minimizing your lifetime number of sexual partners, obviously using condoms are important, and then there's the vaccine as well.
What's the treatment if you get it?
That's actually the bright spot in this whole thing, Julie, is that the vast majority of cases will go away with no treatment. They need follow-up by a physician, but they don't need treatment. Some cases, however, of HPV or their manifestations, like things like warts or precancer of the cervix, will need treatment, and it could be anything from creams to acid to laser to, in some cases, surgery, so it could be significant.
Now, obviously, men get it too, right? Because aren't they the ones spreading it?
That's right. It's not just a woman's issue, and they are the vectors for transmission, as we say in medicine. So men need to be aware of this, and HPV, we have to remember, is the cause for not just cervical cancer most of the time, but throat cancer, anal cancer, vulvar cancer, penile cancer. So this is an issue that men need to be aware of, and recently the vaccine was approved for boys and young men.
Wow, so it can be deadly, potentially it could be deadly in both men and women.
Exactly. It's a real significant health issue, Julie.
A lot to learn about
Yeah.
this. Dr. Jennifer Ashton, thank you.
You bet, Jules.
A lot happens early on The Early Show, weekday mornings on CBS.